Hello and welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. My name's Brett Pontecorvo, and we're starting a whole new series, guys. Gig Performer 5 is out. Just want to say right off the bat, thank you all so much for being here. I know there was a bit of a timing issue. One thing said one thing in one place and another thing in another, but we are live here at 11:15. Usually we're at 11:30. Not sure what happened there, but that is okay. Thank you guys for being with us. Today is all about Gig Performer 5. It's going to be a super exciting time. Go ahead and let us know in the chat where you are tuning in from. It looks like we've got all sorts of friends. Martin Still from the UK saying hello, Martin. So happy to have you with us. Mike 54 in Woodstock, New York. Happy to have you here. Actual Kevin, former Backstage guest as well, hasn't even gotten to check out most of the new Gig Performer 5 features. Yeah, there are quite a few, aren't they? And of course, we have Dave Bolden with us, Backstage visitor as well. And yeah. Okay, so feel free to say hello as you are coming in. We got Ray Myers saying hello from Dallas. And if you have been using Gig Performer 5, let us know what is your favorite Gig Performer 5 feature so far. It's kind of difficult to choose one, but I will say using the GP relayer is definitely an absolute pleasure. We've got Gikusu coming in from Madrid. Hello. George from France. Hello and welcome. Mark Spavin from the UK. So glad that you are here. Mr. Burnham from the Netherlands. Welcome, welcome. All right. Yes, indeed. Let us know what your favorite GP5 feature is. Actual Kevin wrote in. First thing I pulled the shrink wrap off of was GP Relay Layer. Let me send multiple audio with GP instances via graphics card. Very, very cool. Yeah, the possibilities are truly endless with that. Okay. Gikusu agrees. Best feature is Relayer, hands down. We're pretty excited about that. I'm going to do some demonstrations of GP Relayer today. Carl Trier as well, saying GP Relayer is his favorite. Carl, we got to talk about how you're using GP Relayer. For folks who don't know, Carl has an amazing studio. You can check out his episodes, but he is sending audio to and from all sorts of hardware and software synthesizers. So definitely curious what that workflow is. All right, friends, we are going to jump in. It is time to look over all these features, but do feel free as we're going through to comment. Let me know what you're thinking. If you have any questions, happy to answer them. And today, we're going to start off with the envelope follower, which is a brand new plugin built right inside of Gig Performer, which allows you to do all sorts of cool things. And when I think of envelope followers, the first thing that I always think of is creating a wah-wah effect. So we're going to take a look at how to do this. It is pretty easy. I'm going to show you how this is all set up, and then once we've kind of gone through the setup, I'll show you how I built it. So the way that the envelope follower works inside of Gig Performer is you can send audio into it, and it looks like this. I'll pull it up from my other screen here. It looks like this. It has every control that you will ever need in an envelope follower. However, most of the time, hanging out in this center box is really going to get you most of what you need. And so what it does is audio comes in, and it's kind of taking a range and producing CC messages from that. And when I say range, I mean like highest level to the lowest level and producing a range of CC messages. Now, once the envelope follower does that, you can kind of see the signal flow here comes out into here, and you'll want to turn your eyes to what is happening over here. So what it produces is a MIDI CC value. And in this case, it's producing a MIDI CC value of 25. Now, that can actually be mapped. So see if it shows up here. Yeah. So as you see, when I'm hitting those, you're seeing all of these CC values coming through with all these different values. And so now, because Gig Performer has generated this MIDI CC value, I can actually map a widget right here to that particular value. Now, there's some steps. There's some steps with this, guys. We're going to talk about them. But essentially, because so many messages are coming out, you need to map this manually, which is totally possible. So just for like a bit of a breakdown here, what's going on is I've inserted this envelope follower, and then I've put in a MIDI out block to the local GP port. And all that means is Gig Performer has created this port. It's, you know, a local GP port. It's imaginary almost, but really what it is it's virtual. And so inside of the rig manager, if you open that up, you can see coming through the local GP port are the messages that are being sent out from the envelope follower. And if you're tracking with me, that means that now that outgoing MIDI CC message is available as an incoming message, which we can map. So I will go ahead and change this CC number just so you can see the process here. I'm going to change this follower CC to 6, and I'm going to exit out. So when I come over here, you'll see now this widget is not actually doing anything, and that's because we need to map it. So what you can do is if you enter edit mode and come down here to MIDI, instead of choosing learn like you would typically do, you can actually come over and here and hit edit. And that's going to give you a list of all of your devices, your message types, and of course your CC number. So I'm going to choose my local GP port, and I'm going to adjust this to 6 and hope that I remembered that that number is correct. Yeah, check that out. Okay, so now I have this ability to use those messages that are being created by the output, of this envelope follower and map them honestly to anything that I want to map them to. There are some other use cases, which I'll demo right now. How that works, but I think this is a pretty compelling use case. And just for clarity, what I actually have going on here is this filter, or this widget rather, is just mapped to the cutoff frequency on a super simple filter here. And this produces that sweep that's going to give me that wah sound that I'm after. So this is the envelope follower. If you've used this yet in your setup, do let me know. I'd love to hear, and if you're using it the same way as me or not. Carl Trier wrote in that Gig Performer 5 allows him to sell 2 pieces of his hardware now, which is amazing. That's awesome. And it's a big deal for Carl. Carl has a lot of synthesizers, a lot of hardware. Okay. So let's pop over here to another interesting use case for the envelope follower, and that is volume ducking. So perhaps in a world where you are trying to talk over a backing track for some particular reason, you may want the music to be at a particular level unless you're talking. And this is a great way to do it using the envelope follower. So let me show you what I have set up here. Essentially, in the wiring view, I have my music and a gain and balance knob. And all that's happening here is I have music that I could control the level. Okay? Which you might want to do anyway. But what I actually want to happen is I want that vocal volume to be automatically reduced only when I'm talking. And so what I have here, and this is a bit of a live stream scenario, is I have my voice, which I'll play for you in a second, running into the envelope follower. And so my voice is going to create some messages, CC messages, just like we talked about, that are going to control the value of this widget, which is linked to that gain and balance knob. Now, because of the way that the CC messages work, I actually want the volume to decrease when the MIDI CC messages come through. So what I've done is I've just reversed this, and I've also given myself a bit of a range so that I don't get too much sound reduction or too little sound reduction when the ducking goes through. And for folks who maybe are not familiar with that, you can just adjust the range using these two little lines here. There are more than one way to do that, but I actually found that to kind of get it dialed in right, that seems to be the most precise, which is pretty cool. Okay, so this is not me talking. This is a recording of me talking, but you can see how it all works. Hello and welcome to Backstage with Gig Performer. My name is Brett Pontecorvo, and today we are going to be covering everything you need to know about Gig Performer 5. And you see there when the audio stops, the volume of that track automatically comes back, which I think is pretty handy. Okay, if you have any envelope follower questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but I want to push on ahead to GP Relayer, which I am pretty excited about. So inside of our Gig Performer forums, there is actually a template that I created that uses this exact Ableton file. So if you're an Ableton user and you are wanting to kind of get started with this, you can actually go download that, and I'll make sure that this is linked post-show so you can find it easily. But there's very clear instructions about how to set this up, but I'm going to talk through it right now. Ed Rugman has a question about Chord Maker. I see you, Ed. I'm going to come back to you when we get there, okay? So check out what's going on here. I'm going to open up my two different relayer structures. So the way that GP Relayer works is that GP Relayer is going to receive MIDI or audio. And because of that, going between different programs, it actually needs to be recorded from a separate channel, because this channel here, which is receiving audio from my Gig Performer instance, which I'll show you in a second, that's the output. So we can't actually record that output. We need to have a separate channel that is set up to capture the sound of the output of that particular channel strip. And so what I've done here is I have inside of Ableton a grouped track. And the first track says Relayer, and it is hosting GP Relayer, which I'll pull up over here so you can see. And it is set to receive sound via Relay 1. And you can see sound is coming through, and that's coming from Gig Performer, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, inside of Ableton, there is an option to send your audio to or from kind of any place inside of your Ableton Live setup. I don't actually want to hear the audio coming from Gig Performer on this channel. I only want to hear the audio coming in on the channel where I'm recording. And so what I do is I send my audio to sends only, and when I hit a key, you'll see that is blue or purple, depending on what you think. And that means that it's not actually producing audio that you can hear. However, in my second channel, I have my audio from Relayer, which is this channel strip, right? So that one is going to produce sound. It's green. You can see it coming out the mains here, which you're probably actually not hearing. And that is going to allow us to record anything coming in on that channel. As a matter of fact, though, you can actually do this on more than one channel. So let me show you a particular use case. This is something I built for one of my clients. And basically, it was for Sky Full of Stars. And it's got two tracks. It's got a piano track and it's got a synthesizer track. And so I thought, okay, this is kind of a cool way to demo things. Essentially what's going on here, let me play you, is we've got we've got a simple kind of bouncing sidechained compressor happening. So right now that's all being triggered through this MIDI file player. And I thought, well, what if I wanted to record these separately inside of my DAW? Well, with GP Relayer, that's actually pretty simple. So before my audio output, I've just inserted two GP Relayer plugins. The first one is sending on Relay 1, and that is my piano. And the second is sending on Relay 2, and that is the synthesizer. So what you can do is you can pop over into your arrangement view here, and you can record enable your channel 1 and your channel 2. And when I hit record, it will start listening for the sound on that channel, and then I can record directly in, which is going to give me the ability to sort of play my instrument and then also record it. So check this out. Let me go back to this first one here. This is a tune that you might actually use your cutoff faders for quite a bit while you're playing. So we start recording, and then I will... You can see we've got audio coming through on both of those channels, and it will capture any of the sounds as I'm playing. And so what's kind of cool about that is now we have total separation from our playing instrument to our recording device, which means all of these fancy mappings that you built to play live can now actually be recorded inside of your DAW. So you're no longer having to rebuild everything when you are recording, which you've been working on in Gig Performer. Now, one other thing to note is that Gig Performer, GP Relayer works really, really well between instances of Gig Performer. So it's not just for sending to and from your DAW, but I wanted to showcase it in Ableton at least because I think that getting everything set up with the double channel strips, if you're not used to doing that, can be a bit of a learning curve. Now, I want to show you some other ways that you can use GP Relayer alongside of Ableton. And the first way is if you want to use some of Ableton's built-in sounds. So let me pull in this Ableton file. Okay. So this is an example of a new device inside of Ableton called Meld, and it's a pretty simple device, but it's not something that you can access inside of Gig Performer. It's something that you would need to be using Ableton for, and if you are using Ableton in your productions, I could see a use case where you may want to route this back into Gig Performer. And so there are two ways to do this depending on what your workflow is. And the first way that I want to show you is if you're starting in Ableton and moving to Gig Performer. So in this case, what I have going on is into Ableton, I have my keyboard, and then I am sending that MIDI to this track, which has this Meld device on it, and then to a GP Relayer, which is sending audio back to GP on Relay 2. So when I am playing, you can see wiring activity, by the way. That's a new feature. You can see that audio is coming back in. Now, inside of Ableton, I also have another opportunity, and that is to receive MIDI, which I think is pretty compelling. So I'm turning this off for you non-Ableton folks. This track is no longer active, but I'm going to pop over here now to this track. And on here, I have GP Relayer set up to receive MIDI on Relay 1, and inside of Gig Performer, I have this block set up to send via Relay 1. So you can see MIDI is coming in here. Let me zoom in a bit. Okay, so you can see MIDI is coming in via relay 1. When we pop over to Ableton, you can see the sound being produced, going to sends only, by the way, because I want the sound to go back into Ableton. It's hitting this relayer, which is piping my audio back into Gig Performer. So this gives you the power and flexibility of Gig Performer's built-in MIDI in blocks, where you can create keyboard splits, change your channels, everything that is inside of the MIDI in block, which gives you a ton of flexibility, way more than you're going to get inside of Ableton, and then send that over and send it back. And it is 100% playable and really, really powerful. Okay, one other use case before we move on from GP Relayer is MIDI effects. Ableton has a ton of MIDI effects, and they are all quite good. So perhaps you want to take advantage of those MIDI effects. This Ableton file is available in the Gig Performer community forums. So if you want to check it out, you can actually download it as is. But essentially, what we've got going on here is I want to drive the sound inside of Gig Performer. This is a Juno plugin with the MIDI effects inside of Ableton. So what I've done is I've got my audio coming in, sending via relay 1, and then receiving via relay 2. Inside of Ableton, you'll see I've got a similar group to the 10 channels of audio. And here I am receiving GP relayer from 1. And what ends up happening is when I hit a key, I'm getting this arpeggiator here, processing that MIDI, and coming back here to drive the sound of this Juno. Which I think is pretty neat. Now, there are a lot of other built-in effects. There's a chord effect, note echo, pitch, velocity, and scale. And these are all things that maybe you just got used to using. And so you can actually take advantage of those things now inside of Gig Performer, which is really powerful. Okay, so let's talk about the MIDI rechannelizer. It looks like Lance has a question. Does Gig Performer and the DAW have to be on the same computer, or will it work over Ethernet as well? I'm going to pull in David. Let's see here. How's it going, David?
Can you hear me today?
I can hear you. It's good news. It's a special day because we're talking about 5 features, you know, the Ecamm Live
miracle.
powers that be allowed you to speak.
So the answer is yes, they have to be on the same computer. We didn't do networking. There's tons of apps out there, including free ones like Audio Gridder, if you want to have stuff running on multiple computers. Really, excuse me, what drove GP Relayer's development originally, excuse me, was to have an easier way to actually share MIDI audio between multiple instances of Gig Performer. That has some very interesting benefits because if you run multiple instances of Gig Performer, they'll often end up on separate cores. And so you get very good CPU utilization if you've got a multiple cores and the plugins aren't using multiple cores. But you still basically use instances to be servers for, say, a CPU intensive, and then just pull everything back into your main instance of Gig Performer. So that was the original reason for doing it. And then we thought, a lot of people want to just record what they're playing. So let's have an external GP relayer that you can stick into your DAW as Brett has been doing. And then the other thing people ask all the time is, well, I've got all these proprietary plugins in Logic or MainStage or Cubase or whatever it is, and I'd love to be able to use those. Well, the answer is now you can, because if you've got a proprietary plugin that you love, throw GP Relayer into it, and then you can basically feed the audio of that proprietary plugin back into Gig Performer very easily. So those were the goals. It wasn't intended to be a networking solution. I don't think there are too many people getting up on stage and bringing multiple computers and connecting them together.
Mm-hmm.
That really wasn't the primary goal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the 10 channels of stereo audio, yes, each relay, if you will, basically takes a stereo pair. Again, we didn't get into having multiple channels, 10 channels or 16 channels. The goals were very clear what we were trying to do with this version. And we may grow it, as anybody who's been with Gig Performer a long time has seen that, we've created features, they work nice, and then people give us feedback saying, yeah, we could do more with this. So, never say never, but a lot of other things being worked on for the next update of Gig Performer 5
Mm-hmm.
already. Just to say, and
Uh,
we can't do everything in one go.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you popping in, David. Thank you. Okay. So, GP Relayer. I actually met with a guy the other day who was separating his Gig Performer setup into multiple instances and saw his computer respond so beautifully. Massive reduction in CPU usage. So it's definitely something to look into. I can probably demo that at the end, but I want to make sure we get through all of our different features. So let's go ahead and keep going. Okay, the next thing I want to talk through is the MIDI rechannelizer. And this, being somebody who lives in the software world and then kind of expanding outwards, took me some time to understand how profound this is. This gives you unbelievable flexibility really easily. And essentially, MIDI rechannelizer allows you to broadcast MIDI events to as many channels, well, 16 channels, as you would like, as easy as clicking boxes. Marty Wade made a fantastic video going over exactly how this all works. But on a just basic level, if you're playing a MIDI keyboard and you need to have your messages go to several different channels, you can now do that really easily. So I'm going to start by just keeping this on 1 and open up this MIDI monitor here. And you'll see when I press a note on my keyboard, I've got it coming through on channel 1. And down here, I've got an instance of Contact. And Contact has 2 devices in it. It's got on channel 1 an e-piano, and down here on channel 2, it's got Session Pro horns. And so now what I have the ability to do is use this MIDI rechannelizer to broadcast what's coming in on MIDI 1, channel 1 to channel 2. And it's really as easy as that. Now, if we expand this out and we really think through like, okay, what are the repercussions of this? Suppose you are using you're using Gig Performer to also power your hardware boards, and you created a patch on whatever keyboard that you're playing that responds to piano on channel 1, e-piano on channel 2, strings on channel 3, something else on channel 4. Well, now, not only can you send MIDI just to that particular part of the combination you created, but you can actually use Gig Performer then to trigger those individual sounds as their own sets of presets. So this makes MIDI flexible, like unbelievably flexible, as easy as just clicking through things and sending them. So MIDI rechannelizer, really powerful option, not just for folks who are using hardware, really for folks who are doing anything in the software world as well, but kind of getting into a glimpse of the way that people think about hardware was helpful for me in understanding why the MIDI rechannelizer is so profound. Okay, let's keep going, and feel free to ask questions as we go. Okay, let's do the MIDI chord maker. So the MIDI chord maker is what it sounds like, and it allows you to play a single note and map that to chords. And it works pretty easily. If I come in here and choose MIDI Learn and hit a key, Gig Performer is now going to know that is my trigger key. And then I can come up here to MIDI learn and hit whatever chord I want to map it to and leave it. Now when I press C, I get that sound on that chord. Now it's got some other features that I think are pretty cool. One of them is I can remove chords the same way that I would in most devices, but I can actually block notes with the chord maker. And the way that you do that is by shift clicking. And you'll see you've got a little X that shows up there. And so now, if I'm afraid that I was going to hit a C sharp accidentally when I'm playing a set of chords, I now have the ability to block those notes. Somebody wrote in drums on MIDI channel 10, which I think is paying tribute to Marty's fantastic video, which made me laugh a little bit. So yes, drums on channel 10. Okay, so that's one of the things that I wanted to show you. We can block these sounds now, which is pretty cool. Another thing that I think is interesting and never really dealt with it before is this button over here that says legato re-triggers notes. This deals with if a note is re-triggered if it's in two chords. So let's build a situation where this might be useful. So on C, I am going to have C, E, and G. And then on D, I'm going to have C, F, and A. And then on E, I'm going to have C, G, and B flat. So, and actually, let me go through here one more time. I'm going to get rid, I'll leave this. I'm going to get rid of this D, and I'll put this on a C. So, the question is, when I have a chord that goes to the next chord and a note is re-triggered, do I replay it or not? And this button here handles that beautifully. So what you can do is if you have legato re-triggers notes, that means when I play connected, those notes are still going to be re-triggered, which just so you could see. But if I uncheck this, those duplicate notes are not going to be re-triggered. Which actually, in my opinion, gives you the ability to do these things in a very pianistic way, right? Like there are often times where you're holding a single note and you have several other notes that are changing, and this gives you access to do just that. So that is the MIDI chord maker. Okay. Fantastic. Let's have a look at the MIDI transposer because I think this is a pretty cool little addition here that could be useful for some folks. Okay. So right now, essentially what I have is my piano. And if I pull in a transposer, I get this little guy here. And I can now transpose this by whatever I want in the middle of my signal path. And I think this can really come to life if you need to transpose things not at the MIDI in block. If you're having something that you want to be, for example, here's two instruments. They're the same, but maybe I want this one to be an octave higher. now I have that power in the signal chain. I've actually found myself reaching for this, if for no other reason than when I transpose something in the MIDI in block, sometimes I may not remember that it is transposed. But when I actually see this in the signal chain, it's a really easy cue for me that's like, hey, check this out. So there is our MIDI transposer. Okay, MIDI to and from the global rack space. So we now have the ability to send MIDI to our global rack space. So if I had a particular split that I was using that I wanted to trigger a global instrument. So for example, maybe I'm living in a world where in a particular song, my MIDI in block has jumped to my other screen. In a particular song, I want to have piano only on the bottom part for whatever reason. So I can have a MIDI in block here and run MIDI to my global rack space. Then I can pop over to my global rack space and run MIDI into my piano. And you'll see as I'm up here, I'm not getting any sound, but I am getting sound in that lower half. Got a question from Gertz. Gert, maybe I'm getting that wrong, but you can help me pronounce that at some point. So it's a great question. If you right mouse click anywhere in the wiring view, let me get this out of the way, you're going to see all sorts of different options for what you can insert. And you can kind of roll through here. So Gig Performer comes with your audio mixers, gain and balance, your media players, streaming, regular, and audio file player, your different MIDI inputs, your different MIDI outputs, your MIDI processing, which is where you will find your envelope follower, the chord maker, and the MIDI transposer. So that is the easiest way to do it. The other thing that you can do is hit Command or Control P and start typing what you're looking for, and that will pull it in as well. But I think when you're getting started, it makes sense to right mouse click just so you can see what's available, right? You might stumble upon something that is valuable to you. Okay, so that's MIDI to and from global rack space, which actually brings me to something that I didn't plan to talk about, but I'm going to talk about, which is the global rack space is now up here, which takes a second to get used to. However, having it be in this line, for me, has actually been helpful because if you're in a place, for example, where you're moving back and forth between the global and the local, it's going to keep you in whatever view you're in. So if I'm sending audio back and forth between the global rack space and the local rack space, and I need to see what's happening, it's right next to each other. So this is just kind of like a small thing, but it actually, from like a workflow standpoint, is really convenient. Speaking of which, there are some folks that I work with who have really robust global setups, and they maybe have like 12 sounds that they want to have access to all the time, turning things on and off, adjusting the volumes and all of that stuff. And sometimes they run into an issue where they're like, hey, in this particular tune, I need this combination of sounds for my global rack space. Or perhaps they just want everything to be turned off and they don't want to use buttons to do that. There's a small workflow improvement here that that I think is worth exploring. So let's check this out. Inside of the global rack space, I have 3 different sounds. And I know some folks have way more, but I've got piano, I've got organ, and strings. And when I come into the edit mode, underneath advanced, you'll see that there is this option that says global parameter assignment. And if you want to be able to control these locally, all you need to do is go in here and click on these widgets and give them a parameter assignment. That's just going to signal to GP, hey, you might want to access this from a local rack space. And what you can do then is select these and copy them. Now, workflow improvement. Check it out. When I click here and I come back over to my local rack space, which I should actually select a different one, I can paste them. And you'll see right away, these widgets are now controlling what's in the global rack space. So what starts to become accessible is I can have this here be piano. I can have this be strings. And I can have this be organ. And I can save these values. So piano. Let's see, strings. And organ. So any combination of sounds that you want to use, you can now use, and it can be way more robust than this as well. This is just kind of like a framework that I think can be really powerful for people, especially if you're having like a robust global rack space use case experience. Okay, let's talk about song part actions. You're already seeing them. Woohoo! It's so good that it's already working. So inside of Gig Performer 5, we now have the ability to trigger actions as we fire our song parts. So I'm going to go ahead and pop into our intro here. And you hear that click going, maybe. I'm actually going to turn it off. Well, it is what it is. Okay. So I can insert an action, and anytime that song part is fired, those actions will start. So for example, I have at the start of this tune, my global PPM going to 95, saying Gig Performer 5 is my message, and starting the global playhead and turning on the metronome. So now, whenever this is fired, I get all of those things to happen. So nothing is happening. I fire intro. All happens at the same time. Now, suppose in the start of this tune, I'm playing something and I want to just have, the metronome going, so I'm kind of aware of what tempo the tune is going to be at. I have this happening. And then when I start the chorus, I have my audio file player start to go immediately. And so that means that I know, even though I'm about to start a track, that everything is going to be in the exact correct tempo because I had that reference, and then I'm starting right after that going into my track. I want to show you how to do this just in a bit more succinct way. So if you double click on a song part, you'll get your song part properties, which has been there. This is a thing that we've been using for a while. But now down at the bottom, you've got this button that says actions, and it brings up this very cool action management area. And I can now insert a new action just by going to the display. I am going to, I actually think I set this up for some widget stuff. Maybe I'll come back to that. Let's do a simple one. So I can display a message, and maybe I'll say, I don't know, remember to resolve to the 1. Pretty simple. But maybe at this very same time, I want to set a widget value. I'm going to do it. So what you need to do to set a widget value is actually give the name of the widget, which I think my widget is called stop. I'll need to double check in a second. Once you have set up whatever it is you want to set up, you just hit save, and then you hit OK. Okay. Let's see where I actually did this. Aha, okay. So it's under song part actions. So let me go here. Okay. So what happens when I move here is, pop this back open. These widgets have been given names. So I've got here play and here stop. And what that does is it allows you to change the value of a particular widget using song part actions. And buttons maybe are not the best example. Let's see if I can do a better one here. Just do a simple gain and balance to showcase this. So I've put a little bit of gain and balance before this filter, and I am going to put in a slider. And I'm just going to call this volume. So when we toggle back, oops, I need to map it. Let's see here, gain and balance, gain. Okay. So when I toggle back over to my setlist view now, if I want to have an action which adjusts that widget, I can come in here and say set widget value, and I'm going to give it a name, which I think I called volume. We'll find out. And I'm going to set the value to 10. That's really going to bring the volume down, but I think for our use case here, yeah, you can see it really clearly. So in the chorus, I've got this here, and as soon as I move to the verse, I want that E piano to come out. That can be set up that way. There are a lot of song part actions. You can also send OSC messages. So this is a really powerful way to automate your performance while you're performing, right? So you can really just easily move from song part to song part to song part. Your sounds change, your widget values change, your tracks change. Everything just changes with you as you go. This is really cool. And because it's attached to the song part itself, it feels like performance mode, right? Okay, I want to look at the transposing in the audio file player. Okay. So inside of the audio file player, we can start a track. If this track needs to be transposed, all I need to do is move this knob, which of course double clicking will bring it back. And if I click down here and say I want it to be a whole step higher, I can do that. And I can adjust the speed as well. Okay, so pitch and speed. Now, there's also this link to BPM and link to playhead, which I think is pretty cool. So if I link to playhead, then when I play, it will start automatically. So one particular application of that is you can have the global playhead turn on at a song part to automatically start your tracks at the very beginning of a song, which I think is pretty cool if you're using tracks. Okay. And then if I link to BPM, I'm going to be able to adjust the BPM here, and then have it also adjust the speed of my track. So if you know you're bringing in a track at 95 BPM and it's going to need to be adjusted inside of your set, depending on the evening or depending on the night, you will have the ability to do that. Okay. We've made it through all of them. These are the big ones, friends. I want to pause here and just make sure that I have not missed any questions. Okay. Ed was talking about copying things. Okay. So Ed, I see clearly what you're wanting to do here. Basically, you're saying, hey, I want it to always be the same no matter which key I press. Right now, that is not, you would have to program it out. However, I could think of several different ways you could achieve that pretty easily. One of them would be to just put your transposers in between your MIDI devices. So let's see. If I do this one at 4, and do this one at 7, then I have the ability to do that. So that would be a solution for now. Reducing the speed is for when you're getting tired later in a gig. Okay, so Silburn Arthurs wants to know, can you fade in widget movements that you showed earlier? So right now, no. However, if you go to the GP forum, which I know exists, there is a scriptlet that somebody created that allows you to very smoothly fade between two values. So if this is something that is important to you, it is absolutely possible inside of Gig Performer. You just need to go download that scriptlet and get it all set up. And by the way, it works really well. I used it for somebody I was working with to have the volume faders go up and down every time he hit a button, and it was powerful. So that would be an option as well. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about what is coming next, just so you can be aware before we wrap up. So first of all, we've got Joe Luca coming on to talk all about some mental frameworks for how you can play keys. And he made a super compelling video. If you haven't checked that out yet, it is on our channel. I learned a lot from watching him, and I think if you're playing keys, you will too. We've also got Russ the Sound Guy coming on. If you haven't checked out any of his work, type him into Wikipedia. He's playing for some top tier bands and actually using Gig Performer alongside front of house as well. We've also got two other folks who are not yet confirmed that are also playing, very large stadiums using Gig Performer to power their live performance setups. But for now, thank you guys all so much for being here. It has been an absolute pleasure. We hope you're loving Gig Performer 5. If you are, share Gig Performer 5 with a friend. We really believe that Gig Performer is a serious tool for serious musicians. So if you are playing music, you want to make something great, this is the tool that you need to power your live performance. So do share it. We're so grateful for each and every one of you, and we will see you back very soon. It looks like we have one more question. Let's talk about it. Okay, so David is waving himself in. Let me bring him in. How's it going, David?
So it's not a question. There's no manual explicit CPU distribution. We don't even try to do that. But it turns out if you have multiple applications, just in general, the operating system will often assign different cores. And basically, the way we implemented Gig Performer, each instance is essentially a completely different application.
Yeah.
So by default, if there are cores available, you'll get another core for the audio thread. Excuse me. And so that just works. We haven't done much with trying to make Gig Performer itself multi-core. We get asked that from time to time. It's very easy in a channel strip model. It's much more complicated when you have an arbitrary graph, which is what we have. The reality is, at least as far as I've seen, for the most part, a lot of plugins that are very heavy these days are starting to use multiple cores themselves. So they're taking care of it just internally, which is actually much easier, and we really just don't have to worry about it. So if you have a plugin that's not doing that and it's incredibly CPU intensive and you really must use it live, you can't auto sample it, for example, then you put it in another instance, and then again with GP Relayer, essentially that other instance is basically just being a server for that single plugin, and you just basically pass MIDI and audio back in. What's nice is, of course, that works in Windows as well. You don't have to worry about the problems that a lot of people run into with single clients, and if you've got MIDI going to one, you can't have it go to another. Same with audio. So it's kind of quite a clean solution for that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate that.
What does that mean? Any sound engineer, any plans for people like me?
It's already ready.
We've got lots of sound engineers using Gig Performer. In fact, one of the things we did very early was due to my being on tour and watching our sound engineer. I'd be very lucky to work with a rather well-known guy. He used to actually do sound for King Crimson, among many others. And I was touring with a band, and he was trying to record the show. Well, he was doing two things. He wanted to use some effects, like I think the Valhalla reverb and a few others that he liked more than what was built into the mixer. And he also wanted to record the show, and he was trying to do this with Logic. And I like looked at him, after soundcheck and said, "What the heck are you doing?" And he told me. I said, "Oh, we can make this much easier." And we added support. First of all, to make it really easy to just record the show. So if you're on tour, you can push a button, and every night you'll get a complete new folder with every track. The input going into your mixer gets recorded, so you can drag it into a DAW later for post production. And you can also easily route effects from your mixer into Gig Performer and back out, and that works very well. People do build channel strips. There's a bunch of channel strips out there, SSL kind of emulation and Neve and all the other kinds of things. I've never used those myself. People do use those. Some of them pretty good, some of them pretty intensive. Really depends what you're trying to do. So I'm not sure what you mean when you say any plans for people like me. I mean, we already work with people like you. Can,
um,
can you be more specific if you're getting this in real time?
in
I guess.
While we're waiting for that reply, there's a great backstage episode with Matteo Cifelli showing how he uses Gig Performer live. And we also have another front of house engineer coming up. But I know Matteo was using it essentially as a send effect. So he was running out into Gig Performer and back into his board. And that gave him the ability to have presets for different songs where, he wanted a particular sound on one or the other. And met with a guy this week who's doing something very similar, but in a way more robust fashion, using it on the master bus, having several different instances for processing on different channels. So yeah, if you're running front of house and you want access to your VST plugins live, Matteo Cifelli is, stadiums of, lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And it's rock solid, and the latency is low enough for him to use it in a live situation where he's able to have it match the functionality of the board.
Do not get me started on latency.
I I'll try not to. I'll try not to. Um, but when you're in a room and you're dealing with the boards and all of that stuff, Gig Performer holds up. So it's powerful. Silburn Authors wants to know if there's an easier way to open instances. Just go File, Open New Instance, right?
Yeah, I mean that's one way. There's command line ways to do it.
Yeah.
I actually, believe it or not, I guess I've been using this the longest of almost anybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I don't use instances. I've never in the three bands that I tour, and two of them, in fact, if you think of the Pink Floyd with the Wall that we just did, have some very sophisticated stuff going on. I've never needed to use multiple instances.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we probably should try to integrate it a little to make it a little easier. It's basically, and what I always tell people, there was a great line by the singer from Deep Purple once during a sound check where he shouted out, "Turn everything louder than everything else." And the problem, yeah, it's a great line. And the problem with features is, every feature is more important than every other feature. And
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
practice, we got to pick and choose. And as we have done historically, those of you who've been with us a long time, we try to evolve the thing, improve it. We'll have multiple updates with some cool stuff coming. I'm not going to talk about it because we don't want people to ever buy in anticipation of new stuff. Buy
Yeah.
for what it has now. But those of you who've been around with us for a while know that we add a lot of stuff as we keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So, is there any way to upload set lists No, I don't even know what that means.
I could kind of understand if you're tracking your set lists, but you'd have to rebuild them inside of Gig Performer. This isn't what you
Yeah,
asked, but what a cool thing is once you make those set lists, it's very easy to move songs between gig files. So it's worth the time to
yeah.
rebuild it.
One of the things I've thought about more than once, and I've often thought about implementing it. I didn't think anybody else would care, but the idea was forget about playing for a moment. Turn on a mode where we listen for incoming program changes, for example, coming from your sheet music reader or mobile sheets, whatever you're using on a tablet. And rather than switching rack spaces or songs, basically just remember the order of all those program changes, and then when you're done, reorder all the rack spaces to match the order
Ah,
of those incoming program changes,
that's very
and then
neat.
you could just basically tap on songs and it would reorder them. I've thought about doing that, and in fact, you actually can do it kind of now with GP Script, but it's a little messy.
Yep.
I've dabbled with it. I've thought about it. I don't know how many people would care about it, but
Yep.
you can do some cute stuff with that.
One other question coming in from Murray. The answer is yes. We already have templates for front of house setups. Go check out the forum in the shared rack spaces area. They are there, and you can customize them for your liking. Yeah. All right.
It's really, it's not too hard. Every sound engineer's got their own idea for what such a template should look like.
Yep.
So, if you're using a lot of EQs, I use the equilibrium, which I like a lot. You take an input and a couple of things that you want to use, a gain, an EQ thing, and then just duplicate them a bunch of times. I mean, that will work. So,
Yep.
yeah, that at least that's what I've done when I've needed that kind of thing.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. All right. Gig Performer 5, friends. It is available. Make sure you grab it and tell your friends, and we will be back very soon. David, thanks for popping on, and see y'all
Yeah,
next time on Backstage.
but buy it now. I've got kids to feed.
Woo! That's how we'll sign off. I love it.